Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Are you looking for an inexpensive power supply to do a budget build or to upgrade an existing PC such as an OEM machine you see here? Do you want to install a graphics card and need PCI Express power connectors? Is your old power supply dead but you need something that fits within virtually any modern computer? Or maybe from the past 10 years, you have come to the right place. This is the EVGA 450 watt BT 80 plus bronze certified power supply. It generally runs in the $30 or so price range, and it's a very good choice for any of those options that I mentioned. In just a few minutes, I'm going to take it out of the box, and I'm also going to install it into this Acer Aspire T. This is a $450 pre-built machine. It comes with a basic power supply that does not have any PCI Express connectors, so if you want to install a graphics card such as this, you'll need to upgrade your power supply. Now, it is true up front, somebody's going to say, what about power adapters? Can't I use something like this, which converts Molex connectors to PCI Express? Yes, you can. Sometimes, maybe, depending upon your power supply and which graphics card. But the reality is, if you want the sure bet, if you want to be absolutely sure that your graphics card's going to work, that you're not going to pull too much power, because some of these only come with 200 to 250 watt units. This particular one has a 300, but they don't all have 300 watt units in them. Then by getting a power supply, you're guaranteed to not have that problem, and it will fit in there just fine. I mentioned this was 80 plus bronze. That means it's at least 85% power efficient in terms of the power it draws from the wall. All power supplies overdraw their power. That's good at this price point. Now, there are gold, platinum, and titanium power supplies which are more efficient, but they cost many times more than this does. For a basic, inexpensive budget build or a pre-built machine such as an Acer, HP, Lenovo, Dell, etc., it's a good choice because it fits. Some higher-end power supplies are actually physically larger. They'll fit in custom builds, but not necessarily in these budget machines. You can comfortably use this power supply for anything up to a Ryzen 7 or an i7 CPU and up to an RX Vega 56 or a GTX 1080. I would not put a 1080 Ti or a Vega 64 on this, and I certainly wouldn't put Skylake or Threadripper on it either. But having actually used power measurement tools measuring power draw from the wall, 450 watts is enough for most mid-range to even high-end machines. To give you an example, my i7 8700K with a GTX 1080 Ti on it pulls less than 400 watts. So, for example, an i7 7700K with a GTX 1070 or 1080 is definitely going to work on this power supply. You don't need 600, 700, 800 watt power supplies to run those type of CPUs. Now, if you're building a $1,500 to $2,000 machine, would I use this? No, not at all. I would get a nice 600 watt 80 plus gold, better power efficiency, and I'd run it in the middle power band. Those come with better warranties, modular cables, and whatnot. For an i5 or a Ryzen 5, for a GTX 1060 or 1070, or an RX 580 or RX Vega 56, this actually does the job just fine. Enough talking, let's take it out of the box, shall we? It's always so much fun to take the shrink wrap off the first time. It's shiny. And with all the plastic wrap off, now we just have to cut the box seal. It's like Christmas every day, always finding new and fun stuff. Oh, what do you know? It's a power supply. Inside, we have a very basic manual, which you actually probably don't need to read. It says basically plug this in, screw it in here, and so on. It does include a 3-pin power connector. This connects the power supply to a standard 3-prong wall outlet. And there are a bunch of cables inside here. One thing I really like about the new updated power supplies, and this is a fairly new model from EVGA, is not only are they sleeved, but they are fully black cables. No ketchup and mustard colors here whatsoever. The older power supplies, I previously reviewed a 500 watt 80 plus bronze from EVGA. They are black sleeved, but underneath they're ketchup and mustard color, so you still have a bunch of ugly colors. Now, does that really matter in something like this Acer Aspire T? No, but if you're doing a custom build, if you have an open side panel and you don't want a bunch of ugly looking cables inside your machine, please note that all these cables here are completely black end to end. And here you can see the power supply out of the protective bubble wrap. Now, this is a standard length power supply. It's the same length that you're going to find in Dells, Acers, HPs, etc. As I mentioned before, some of the fancier higher end units are physically longer and won't fit into the mounts because there's actual special metal cutout mounts in some of these systems. Not an issue if you're custom building so much, but it is if you're upgrading. Now, there is a standard fan on the bottom. It's not overly fancy, but it's there and it does the job. I mentioned before this comes with a 3-year warranty, which is pretty standard for under $50 power supplies. You can, of course, get longer, but you'll spend more. One nice feature of these, as opposed to the OEM power supplies, is the fact that we have a physical power switch. So rather than having to hold down the button on the front, if you need to kill power of your machine, you can always actually come back here and physically turn it off, which most power supplies that come with machines these days don't have. Another nice feature, there is no voltage toggle switch. This is automatic voltage correcting from 100 volts all the way up to 240 volts. While the actual cable that runs to the wall will have to change because of plugs, you can use this power supply anywhere in the world if you're traveling or perhaps you move. You don't have to change your power supply. It is automatic. The other side of the power supply is very nice. If you don't like that ugly label, you can certainly see on this side we just have EVGA's logo imprinted into the metal, so it doesn't stand out. It's not gaudy or flashy at all. Here we have the mess of cables. First, we're going to start with the reason why you might be buying this in the first place. 2 6+2 PCI Express power connectors. They're on a single cable. These can either act as 6-pin or 8-pin connectors, and of course you have 2 of them. So you could run basically any graphics card on the market with this. I mentioned before it would run a 1080 Ti. I don't recommend it. I think you should spend more if you have that kind of graphics card, but it will do it. 24-pin ATX cable goes to your motherboard. 4+4 CPU power connector. This connects to the top of your motherboard. Most modern systems use an 8-pin connector. These just push together. But if you have an older system or perhaps an OEM system, some of those only use 4. You're just going to use half of this. These 2 cables are identical. Each of them has 2 SATA power connectors for SSDs, hard drives, for the DVD drive in the front, etc. So usually one of these will be routed to the top to power the DVD drive and perhaps a hard drive, and the other can be routed to the bottom to power other SATA devices such as SSDs. So 4 drive connectors. The last cable is actually 4 connectors on one. There are 3 4-pin Molex connectors and a floppy power connector. I'm willing to bet very few people will actually use this cable, but if you do have some device in your system or you have an older system, 5 or 10 years old, you need a power supply for, then you've got Molex connectors and maybe even a floppy connector if you need one. That's pretty much it when it comes to the power supply. Let's get this installed. We have now opened up our Acer Aspire T and laid it flat on the desk, taking the side panel off. You can see our CPU cooling fan here, our power supply here. This is what a 4-pin Molex power connector looks like. In fact, there's 2 of them because I have previously used this adapter I showed you earlier to put a GTX 1060 in here. A single fan mini will run just fine on this 300 watt power supply, but not all pre-builts have 300 watts. Not all of them have 2 of these. And of course, you may want to put in a RX Vega or even a RX 580 or a GTX 1070 or 1080, in which case you definitely need to replace the power supply. The inside of your computer may look different than this, but there's only a few basic cables you need to worry about. The first is the CPU power connector, which is up here. This is a 4-pin, but it could be an 8-pin on yours. The 24-pin mainboard ATX connector, which you can see right there. That is the longest and the hardest cable to remove because it tends to be in pretty tight. But that is the big cable that powers everything on the board. Then you have SATA power connections. In this case, we have one to the hard drive, one to the SSD, and then one to the DVD drive up here. We are not using the Molex connectors for anything else, so that Molex connector on the power supply isn't needed. It really is as simple as taking the power supply out. There are 4 screws right here. Disconnect the CPU power connector, the mainboard connector, and the SATA connectors. At that point, you can take the power supply out, put the new one in, and plug those cables in. It really is that simple. With all of the cables disconnected, we simply pull the power supply out. You can see the ketchup and mustard colors that I mentioned before. We'll get this out of here. Then we take the new power supply and simply drop it into the same place the previous one was. Now that I've screwed the power supply in, now we just reconnect all the cables. When we have bundles of cables, like the Molex power connector, I'm using a zip tie to keep this in place, and I'll just tuck it into this empty drive bay. It is now time to install our graphics card. You can see the 6-pin connector right here. In this particular case, we simply have to lift this up, insert it into the slot, and then close it. The new power supply is installed, CPU power connector, mainboard connector, the SSD and the hard drive are connected, and our 6-pin PCI Express power connector are now connected as well. Time to put the cover back on, plug it in, boot it up, and it'll be ready to go. There's nothing else you have to do other than install your NVIDIA GeForce drivers, which you'll download from NVIDIA.com to make your graphics card work. There you have it, a quick and simple upgrade. Setting up to film what you just saw took far longer than actually doing it. In fact, the video file of me recording doing that, including talking before editing, was only 12 minutes long. I could have done that in less than 5 minutes if I wasn't trying to record it. Granted, I've done it many times in the past, but if you're intimidated about replacing the power supply in your computer, don't be. They're standardized. This will fit in basically anything. It is as straightforward as it appeared just then. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, check the links in the video description. Link to this, link to that, and link to that will all be down in the description to both Amazon and Newegg. Those are affiliate links. They do support the channel. If you found this helpful and useful, please use those links when you're shopping. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.